Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo Podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey y'all.
So, why don't we jump right in? And what's our topic for the day?
Yeah, so welcome back from break, everybody. I wanted to take this week to jump into a topic. I'm starting to see a few of these pop up here and there, and I thought, man, it's something we haven't really touched on, and that would be collaborations within gacha games. So, our break from the show, I know we did a couple of videos. You did a little review of your experience with Nikkei, and I did a response vid. If you haven't watched those, you can check those out for a little give and take there. But in that, I mentioned there was going to be a collaboration for RE0 or ReZero with Nikkei, and it got me thinking about other collaborations that other gacha games have done. And then Genshin has technically had a collaboration with PlayStation and the Horizon series with the character Alloy when that was released out. But I wanted to get your thoughts and maybe talk about what your opinions are, Steve, of collaborations. Do you like them? Do you not like them? And I guess we'll just start there and see where we go.
Okay, that works. Just for those of us who might not be super familiar with collaborations, you alluded to what's involved with them, given some examples. But would there be any other details that you think someone who might not be
Oh,
familiar with them?
yeah. So for any listeners that are maybe thinking about trying out gacha games specifically, or maybe you're stepping into video games for the first time, whenever we refer to a collaboration in terms of the gacha games, it's where a game will work with another IP or another intellectual property, whether it be from another game or from a TV show or an anime or movie, and bring those characters into their own game in whatever story they want to create where that makes sense or sometimes doesn't make sense. And then that way have characters from that game be available within the originals game. So like I mentioned, yeah, Genshin having its own unique world. When they launched for the PlayStation, they introduced Alloy, who is a character not in Genshin, but is originally from the PlayStation exclusive game Horizon Zero Dawn, and they made her a character they gave out, I believe, for free to everybody. That crossover event to celebrate launching on the PlayStation. Now, Genshin didn't include her in any type of events or any type of story in that regards. I think it's just, hey, here's the character. But other gacha games will create maybe an event that has some story, typically explaining like how through magic or science or whatever genre the game falls into, how those characters came over. For Nikkei, this is their, I believe, third collaboration. They previously did one with Chainsaw Man. They did one with Near Automata, and now we have Zero going on. So that's what a collab is in terms of the game or video games. Steve, to throw it back to you as far as your thoughts. I don't know if you've logged in since the Nikkei collaboration started, or maybe if you were playing a gacha game that's done some collabs in the past.
I did log in to Nikkei during the Re-Zero collab. I haven't had a chance to. This has been a busy week for me, so unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get in every day and play. I'm gonna guess I'll open up with the hard truth of I'm typically not a fan of collabs with a caveat, which is that if I don't care about the story of the game, or if it's already a kitchen sink style setting or setup, I'm more okay with them.
What do
Um,
you mean by a kitchen sink setup?
I'm thinking something like the Disgaea gotcha game that was out for a little while. God, I think it was 6 years ago, something like that was when I played it. It's been a bit. But that gotcha game, because Disgaea is already multiple video games with multiple different characters, they have a history of bringing in characters from other Atlas franchises into the game. That doesn't having someone come in from, say, ReZero or Nier or an anime or what have you, them coming in doesn't really bother me because it's already a everything but the kitchen sink. Whereas something that's trying to be have its own visual identity, tell its own story, be its own thing, I'm now giving a very hard side eye to a lot of Hoyoverse games here. Those I'm less in love with the idea unless some real work and elbow grease is put in order to make it work. There are other caveats that I'll get into later, but and other issues that I have with collabs, but just from a story overall point of view, I'm not a giant fan unless it's already in something that's a multiverse, as I said, kitchen sink type setup. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so that's a fair take. For me, so for collaborations, to me, the first and foremost, they have to make sense within the universe. So if you're in a fantasy setting for your game and you try and bring in something maybe that's more steampunky and does that mesh doesn't really fit, that kind of throws me off a little bit, and I would say those would be misses. The other bit too, and I think this might be applicable to everybody, it would be is if you don't resonate with the collaboration. So if you aren't familiar with the source material, it's not necessarily going to move the needle one way or another unless the units maybe are meta and you are a meta chaser, or it fills a need or a hole in your team that you're needing. So collaborations on a whole, I can like them if they have an IP that I really like. So a lot of gacha games, I know there's the old rumor about the Persona 5. Once you do a Persona 5 collaboration, you're going to end of service within a year type thing. That's been a trend that's happened for a few games, but there's some games that have also survived. So like I said, it's more of a you find the evidence you want to find. But for that type of collaboration, I enjoy that because I enjoyed the Persona 5 and that franchise as well. And a lot of times they can fit that into a fantasy setting and make that work, which a lot of gachas are. But there will be collabs again for me that don't move the needle because I'm not familiar with maybe the source material. I'll be honest, for this Nikkei ReZero one, this is one that's a miss for me. For the source material, I've tried to watch the anime. I've watched a handful of episodes and it just didn't really resonate with me. So I was already, this wouldn't be my preferred for this particular game. And then the other issue that I have, and I've seen a couple players voice this opinion as well, is it almost feels like this particular collab in specifically was rushed because apparently there is another season of the anime coming out, and so they wanted to get it in line with that to maybe bring Nikkei fans over to start watching the anime, and then also, of course, with collabing, bringing ReZero fans over to maybe try out Nikkei. But so it felt rushed, and what I mean by that is some of the unit animations are very awkward looking. There's some graphical glitches or disconnects that they actually patched some of them today. And then they're doing a premium, like a gacha skin, which the way Nikkei does it, to keep it simple, because we're not talking about that today, but it's basically $60 guarantees a very nice skin that has custom voice lines, a custom skill animation, stuff like that. But imagine paying and going that full $60 and then you get a skin that graphically glitches out the character when it's in your party in combat. So that's what I mean when I feel it was rushed.
Okay. I do want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which is you mentioned meta. And at least for me personally, I think one of the root issues I have with collabs is not necessarily the collab itself, but what happens after. Alloy is I'm bringing it back to Genshin here. Alloy is my let's go platonic ideal of how not to do a collab. In part because she was a weak character. It was very clear that she was tacked on as something that looks like PlayStation wanted, or Sony
Probably,
wanted.
yeah.
I'm speculating. I don't know, but I feel like it was something that Sony pushed because Alloy doesn't ever show up in the story. She doesn't even get a character quest. She doesn't have a hangout event. She's just this cancerous tumor hanging on. And from a meta perspective, from a gameplay perspective, there's no way to get any constellations in Genshin. You can't improve her through constellations the way you can other four-star characters. In that aspect, I feel like one of the things that causes me consternation with collabs is the aftercare. What happens when you release a meta unit? And you're never going to get that unit again in the future? Are they added to the standard pool? how do they fit in with the game in general? And I've seen games that do it well. I've seen others that, let's just say, don't do it as well. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair too. And then we talk about meta, and I'll use Epic 7 as an example with their collaborations. Because to me, Epic 7, in terms of this particular collab, I think they do it in the right way. And I understand there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in terms of getting the contract and the agreement between the two companies and the two IPs to agree to lend the resources and
Mhm.
stuff. But Epic 7, years ago, they did a Guilty Gear collaboration. And in that Guilty Gear collaboration, if you're not familiar with Guilty Gear, it's a 2D fighter similar to Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat genre esque, but it's got a more anime aesthetic. So as far as the aesthetic, it fit with what Epic 7 was. And then some of the characters that they released, they gave you one 5-star, which is their highest rarity for doing the collaboration. I forget that character's name. I think it was like Ken, but I might be just conflating that with Street Fighter. But there was Dizzy was one of the other characters.
Yep.
And Dizzy was, when she came out as a unit in Epic 7, was meta. She was one of the best characters you could get, especially for PvP. And if you know anything about Epic 7, the PvP scene in that game is ridiculously insane in terms of what people spend to be competitive. But to your point, this brings up to the aftercare of, well, what are they going to do after? Because once the banner runs for its 2 or 3 weeks, if you weren't playing at that time, or you didn't have the currency to pull, or you just got super unlucky and never hit Dizzy, you couldn't get her. And in the instance of some collabs that go on, they never repeat. And so you've just missed out on that unit forever. So other games maybe have, I think Azure Lane has something with like Holo Live that they did, or some other games had some Holo Live stuff. I'm sure that's pretty popular. But what Epic 7 does is then the next year they reran the event, and I think then they brought it over another character from Guilty Gear, but they reran the banners again. So if you missed Dizzy that first year, you essentially had to wait a year to get her again. So that to me is a good route to go with it. Now, the subtext to that too is a lot can change meta wise in a year, but Dizzy was still a pretty strong unit, but not meta defining like she was when she first came out. But to me, as far as how to do it,
Mhm.
I think that's a good way to go about it, is by making those characters available, whether you are able to get the licensing again to run the banner again, or I, the flip side would be I can't say, I don't say you just can give the characters out to those that missed, because then the people that paid for it would be outrage and a giant
Yeah.
uproar. So I understand it's delicate to balance that, those players that missed out and have FOMO versus how do we get them these characters type thing. But that to me is the best way that I've seen. It's just rerunning that the next year, and so I'm glad they're able to do that.
Yeah, and to me that seems like the best way to do it is, in my heart of hearts, I feel like if you're going to set up a collaboration, you're going to create a character, that character needs to, at minimum, be, when you go in and you make these licensing agreements, you need to go in and make sure that character can at minimum be added to a standard pool of characters. They can be pulled regularly, or whatever the general batch is. Typically, again, I can't speak for every gacha. They all have different pool systems. Pool systems and economies. We we have episodes in season 1 that cover some of that. I can't remember off the top of my head which episode it is, but not important. To my point, in some way you need to be able to get the character after the fact and be able to use them, even if it's one where they're not meta, they're not super important. That aftercare matters, and until I've seen a gacha do a collab, you don't know what you're getting in that respect. And again, that's where part of my distaste for them comes from, not necessarily with the idea itself, but with the fact that a lot of companies, I feel, tend to ignore that aftercare. They do it for the big pool of characters, or big pool of the big draw of new potential players coming in for that event, but they fail to account for anyone who's coming in after. Another Genshin example of this would be limited events just in Genshin. The fact that I don't believe either of us has a Festering Desire, a sword that was only available if you played in the first 3 months of the game, and we're able to play that event. And if you miss that event, you will never be able to get that weapon, ever. So
Yeah, I do like to see the repeat. And for those that were curious in our discussion on pull economies in gacha games, want to check out episode 6 from our first season there, would be the one to view in regards to that. Now, talking about, yeah, the availability, that's important, right? And I'm glad that Epic 7 does that and they bring it back. And it's not like they bring it back copy and paste and like, here's the same thing. They do bring back a lot of the same stuff, so there is some rinse and repeat, but they usually add one new element or one new thing or a new character. While maybe even if it's 90% of it is copy and paste from the previous year's collab, there's still a little bit new for that player that did experience it last year. Or in a game like Epic 7 where getting duplicates of a character increase the viability and the stats of the character. So there is value to that for the returning player to partake and invest in the collaboration again, not just capture that new player base. If it's something where you're doing a collaboration and you're literally just running the same thing every year for the returning player, that can wear kind of things like, well, I saved up all my pull economy, or if I am a spender in the game, I spent all this money on a character for the exclusivity, and all you did was really give me a temporary exclusivity type thing. So I always want to see some type of innovation or something new to a collaboration if they do bring it back. So that way you're still capturing that new player base, but you're not spitting in the face, as it were, of your core group.
yeah, I think at the core, I would have a bigger issue of just wholly rerunning events for a patch or for a certain cycle without any new content. If it's a sub event where, okay, to use again Epic 7 because that's just our go to example for this one, if they were to run the Guilty Gear event exactly the same, but as a secondary, and then they have a main event, so it's like, oh, hey, if you didn't do this one before, you can go in, you can do that event, and you can pull on that banner. But the main thing that we're doing is this, then that's one thing. But an entire patch cycle, an entire roughly, I think most gachas use anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks. That long of a time without new content, it's a skip patch. That's not great. I wouldn't be super happy with that.
And we have, there's a few collabs going on now with various games. I saw one today. I was actually surprised because Artery Gear Fusion, which is very similar to Epic 7 in terms of the type of play, it's just mech girls effectively and upgraded graphics a little bit. So they have a collaboration going on with something I hadn't heard of before, Mega Dimension Neptunia 7. Not sure what that is, if I'm being honest. But what intrigued me about it was I'm pretty sure that Artery Gear Fusion is end of service. Like they have an end of service date and then they still have a collaboration going out. But I think it's because they're end of servicing maybe here in North America, but perhaps they are still continuing in the overseas market and they're just shutting down American servers. Or excuse me, not American servers. Let me correct that. Global servers, because for some reason global means America, even though there are people outside of Asia and outside of America that play gacha games.
Yes, but based off of revenue, no.
Topic for another day, but that's always funny to me when a game launches. Anyway, so in seeing some of these gachas that are out there, and I touched on if I don't know the source material, it doesn't necessarily resonate with me, and then I just have to consider the meta, right? For you, Steve, is that a factor at all for you in any gacha you play? If you don't resonate with it, does that affect you one way or another, or you don't care if it looks cool? I'm gonna pull for the characters, and then maybe I'll even go see what the source material is.
Maybe. I really would have to say that's on a case by case basis. Again, I do think, just as mentioned, because of the potential extreme FOMO involved with collabs, I tend to recoil from them. Um, if it is on something that I'm not necessarily 100% familiar with, that if the character looks cool, the character looks cool. That's going to drive me to potentially go and check out the source material. But I guess the answer is a collab event could potentially push me to broaden my horizons and try out new stuff. But most of the gacha games I play tend to be very thin on the ground with collabs. It's not a aspect of gacha games that I am a big fan of or tend to indulge in. So there you go. Not a
Yeah.
great answer, but
So I'll use the Nikkei collabs as my example because each one has had a different effect. I've had a different approach to. So
mhm.
the very first one they did was Chainsaw Man, and when that collaboration came out, I had not seen any of the source material. It was on my to watch list because it was very popular at the time. Because I
Okay.
believe I think the anime had just started coming out or was simulcasting when new episodes were dropping. I don't remember, but it was very popular. And because I wasn't familiar with the source material, I was just looking at it from, okay, how do these units look and how do they perform? And I wasn't really, the characters weren't very visually appealing to me in terms of how they appear in Nikkei, because
Mhm.
those are two different aesthetics. Because Chainsaw Man it's I would say it's more gory. It's gory, but it's not like super gore. But there is gore in it, and
Mhm.
it's not a very fan servicey type anime. It's not even really like a harem anime, right? And Nikkei it would more, I think, actively fit with an anime that would be like a harem anime type thing, right? It's similar vibes with more depression.
Ladies in only okay fitting suits doesn't really match the aesthetic that Nikkei
Yeah.
goes for.
And
Yeah.
so with that, so I ended up skipping. Skipped a point on them because there wasn't anything that was meta defining at the time. Now, after the fact, I think Power she's got a niche role in PvP as being a tank that can be unkillable for a brief duration and taunts opponents.
Mhm.
So it was very niche, right? So I was like, if you're not meta, okay, I'm not attached to the source material. Now, since then, I have gone and I've watched Chainsaw Man. Actually, really thoroughly enjoyed the first season that was available to us. I haven't read any of the manga or read anything beyond what happens in what's been released in the anime. So I know there's more out there if I want it, but I'm waiting because I want to see where they take it. But we're in a state with Nikkei where we don't know if they do a repeat, right? We don't know if
Mhm.
they're going to repeat collaborations, get that IP. So maybe I've missed those two characters forever, and I'll just have to live with that. The next collaboration they did was Near Automata, which I had played Near Automata games, and I was like, at least 2B aesthetic. We can see that in what Shift Up, the developer of DK, is doing in their soon to be released Stellar Blade, which looks very similar to Near Automata. Uh,
Yeah.
and I actually believe that there's probably going to be a Stellar Blade crossover with Nikkei, and that character will appear in Nikkei because you don't have to collab, you don't have to
Yeah.
get any outside
You
contracts if
have the
it's your own
rights to the
studio.
character.
Your hard part's done. But anyway, so for Near Automata, while I was familiar with the source material, I threw a couple 10 polls at the characters, like, hey, if I get them, great, because I do like how they look, and the game franchise itself is good, so I threw out. Now they do end up being pretty, they end up being very good characters, especially if they're highly invested with a couple copies, and then of course you max out their skills and everything like that. And then for this ReZero one, again, familiar with the source material, but it didn't really resonate with me. And so then I'm like, okay, well, then the characters have to look really good or they have to be really good. And the answer to that has been they don't really look very good in any of the costumes or the skins that they get, whether they be the default skin, the free skin you get if you're able to pull them, or the gotcha skin that you have to pay for. None of them look very good. Again, it's for Nikkei being what it is and being a waifu harem type collector, the character models in ReZero are very conservative. And so that dynamic or aesthetic didn't necessarily fit for me. So that's why I was confused why they picked ReZero versus another anime they could have picked that makes more sense. So it's a skip for me, and
Yeah.
I'll be sure voicing my opinions on how constructive criticism on how they could have done better once the survey comes out. But that's the three different angles that I've taken in collabs in one particular game, right? Where I'm familiar, or I should say I'm aware of all the source material, um, and whether I'm attached to it or not, kind of ended up being what I ended up doing.
Okay. Yeah. Again, in general, tend to engage with collab.
Has there been one in a game you've played that resonated with you, or from a franchise you enjoy? Have you played any of the games that did a Persona 5 collab? Because I know you enjoy that franchise, or was there something else out there?
I'll be honest, the problem is I don't remember most collabs. They are not a high point in the game for me, so they
Hmm.
tend to just. I will admit, I did take some time real quick to look up, just to steer back to Hoyoverse a little bit. I wanted to know, hey, what's their history of collabs? And so far as I can tell, the two big collabs they've done is Honkai Third Impact with Evangelion, which makes sense because Third Impact, or Impact Third, I
That's
apologize.
that's right. They did
Third.
do that. That's yeah. You're jarring my memory. Yes, that is. They did
Yeah,
do that one. Yep.
which it's a game that was already inspired by Evangelion. I can see that where that works. The unfortunate part is I did look it up, and it turns out that this happened back in, I believe, 2021. Could have that date wrong again. I'm not a Honkai Impact Third player, but apparently this was about 3 years ago, and in the patch notes they made it clear that it'll never come back due to licensing issues or licensing agreements, which is unfortunate, but based off of how Alloy worked out as well, not surprising. It does mean that I think in the future, any potential if Zen Zoneless Zero, it's three Z's,
Yep.
Honkai Star Rail, or Genshin, if we hear news about a collab, I think that actually is probably going to turn me off to it because, again, as previously mentioned, aftercare is very important to me. And based off of Hoyoverse's history, I just don't trust them to support that. I also am struggling to think of franchises that I think would blend at all with the current ongoing setup. Maybe when Persona 6, I think Persona 6 is the next one. Maybe when
Yeah,
that one
that would
hits,
be.
there'll be something for Zen Zoneless Zero. I could see those two crossing over decently just based off of tone. Honkai, I'm struggling to come up with something that isn't an anime from like the 90s. Reach out and try and get Cowboy Bebop crossover or something like that, like they did with Overwatch.
Or Fantasy Star Online or something like that.
Yeah,
No,
maybe.
I'm like you. In terms of Hoyoverse and collabs, I actually would probably say I'd be okay if they never did a collab. I think Hoyoverse has done a good job building unique characters in a unique world that they don't necessarily need to bring in any collaboration units because they would be so out of place. Because that was the one thing to me is like when they had Alloy, and I understand again that was probably what Sony and PlayStation did in part of the agreement, like, hey, you got to have a character so we can kind of, push our product too, type thing. But she feels so out of place in that world. And then, like you said, with Aftercare, yeah, there hasn't been anything with her. There's no story or hangout event with her. So I almost don't want to see any collaborations in Genshin. And then also too, because yeah, I don't feel like they would come back if Honkai Impact the Third is any indication, because that game's been out for a very long time, and yeah, for Evangelion to not make a repeat cycle, yeah, that makes it sound like they're not able to get that licensing again for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I would be okay if they didn't, because like again, I think they have a uniquely built world that is strong enough to stand on its own that you don't have to. And I also think they've exploded on the scene big enough because that's part of it too, is to bring new fans in to both mediums, and they're very big and I think are able to pull people in with just the amount of media they put out there. Look at the stuff for Atron that just recently came out, like all the videos and stuff that they put out for her is, I think that sucks people in pretty easily because it all looked great. And then for
See,
me too, as far as like planning like my pull economy, if there was a collab, man, that would throw a wrench in like characters that I'm planning for that we have an inkling are coming down the path because they don't have NPC face, or because we just have been told by Hoyoverse that they're going to be playable eventually, right? Yeah, that would throw a wrench in my plans in that regards.
yeah, about the only thing I could see collab wise, I see two possibilities as to how we end up with. One would be Genshin finally gets onto the Switch and Peach becomes a playable character because that's what Nintendo demands in order to get Genshin on the Switch.
Link would be a much better fit, and ironic since this was considered a Breath of the Wild clone. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
It would be, but I don't think Nintendo's that clever. Maybe Zelda. I could see them getting a Zelda.
Peach would be so out of place. Anyway, go ahead.
You get the joke. Anyways,
I'm just laughing.
Yeah.
I'm seeing her running around and climbing up walls and just no. Oh god, no.
what pulls turnips out as her E and throws them?
Pulls little
Or
toads
radishes.
out and throws them
Yeah,
at him.
Her ult is let them eat cake, drowns people in cake. You can determine which type of cake I'm talking about of your own volition, but anyways, the other possibility I see would be, I guess what I mean from that example is that it's somebody, it's similar to the Sony agreement, where it's part of a deal in order to get Genshin, get Honkai Star Rail, get Zone Zero onto new platforms that they want inroads on. I don't believe that Genshin is on Xbox 360 or Xbox
No,
platform.
it's not. No.
Yeah, so maybe Master Chief will end up in Star Rail. Who knows? Again, I'm joking here, but similar type setup there. The other I could see happening is I haven't forgotten. You might have, but Genshin is getting an anime,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there's going to be a studio that makes that anime. And depending on ownership, deals, rights, conversations there, I could maybe see something popping up from that, depending on what else that studio has worked on.
That is a good point.
Again, I am too lazy / handcuffed at the moment to be able to look up what that studio is that's doing it and if they've got any previous works or anything like that. But depending on how that process is going, I could potentially see something via that route, especially if through the complex web of business, Hoyoverse or MiHoYo, whoever, either own partially or outright the studio that's making it.
And you mentioned Genshin to the Switch. I think I saw somewhere, or I read somewhere that the Genshin Impact / Switch website is no longer found. Like it's no longer a workable link. So that project may be postponed indefinitely. Anyway, just a quick note on that.
I wouldn't be super surprised on that one, but
yeah, since it was originally announced at launch of the game, and then to be in plans and hasn't happened while other things have. Anyway, but yeah, that's a good point about the anime, and if they don't do have their own studio do it, if they do it to another studio, yeah, what kind of agreements could come from there? I will throw for an experience with a collab that I'm gonna bring an older and perhaps forgotten about gacha game. We haven't mentioned it on this show in a while, but Alchemy Stars. They did a few collabs. They also did a Persona 5 collab with Joker, Morgana, and I think King as well. So they did that one and made them pullable fun units, and then they've done a few others as well. There was some, I think there's like an anime. Again, this one was source material I wasn't familiar with, which is like some type of Dragon Maid anime.
I think the anime is just called Dragon Maid.
Oh, is it quite okay? Yeah,
I think so. It's off the top of my head. I don't.
Alchemy Stars is a unique gacha in terms of its gameplay. It's a tile-based board, and it's basically a giant Connect 4, but a little bit more intricate than that. But at its core, that's Connect 4 in terms of all the colors and stuff. A unique gameplay. But I enjoyed that collaboration and them implementing those characters there because the art looked good, and they were able to keep the units and fit them in with the play style and the story a little bit. And I believe they gave one of the characters for free, and then the other two, were their own separate banners. And I'm just having a hard time remembering because it was a while ago. Were they running simultaneously or one after the other? Because I think they were one after the other, which is ideal. You don't necessarily want them running at the same time because you want to have maybe 2 cycles to crew up all the poll currency so you can attempt to go for both. But that's one that I remember that we hadn't mentioned yet, and it was a gacha we hadn't mentioned that we'd played before, but that was a fun one.
Yeah. So I guess, do you have any other thoughts or anything that you want to share about collabs?
I think we touched on everything. One thing that I touched on earlier, but just to get out there and reiterate maybe in a slightly different way, because we talked about our collaborations, do they come back? And we talked about it in terms of the FOMO missing out, and I alluded to a little bit is the unit meta, but to expand on that very quickly, yeah, if you're going to have a character that's never going to come back and is a meta unit, that can be a problem because, yeah, the players that did miss out on that now have no chance of ever getting this meta defining unit, and they're just going to be locked out of whatever content, or if it's PvP, they're going to be significantly handicapped because they don't have this meta defining unit. So I think that's why we see collaborations and the units themselves aren't typically meta defining. Like, so the only example I can think of was Dizzy as being meta defining in Epic 7, but they've rerun her. And I was having a hard time remembering if there was anything else that I could think of. And I wanted to ask you if you remembered any that were meta defining that haven't come back, because, again, that to me would be a problem.
Yeah, again, not really. Again, it just reminds me of, and I mentioned this before, the Genshin event issue of a weapon comes out and you can never get it again. I don't remember any instance of a collab character that had that happen, but dollars to donuts, it's happened. Somewhere out there, it's occurred. I hope that if anyone out in the audience knows of a situation, feel free to remind us of that horrible time that occurred. But off the top of my head, I got nothing.
Okay. Yeah. And with Genshin, yeah, they're able to do that with the events, yeah, with Festering Desire and stuff like that. But, and while that is mildly frustrating for collection purposes, like, it's not meta defining. So it's, while it is a negative, it's not like
The
gonna make
caveat I want to stick on there is Albedo signature weapon was an event.
fair. I'm
Not
sorry, Albedo. I'm sorry, Albedo mains. He's not meta. But
agreed. I'm just saying.
yeah, I understand. Because for a while, yeah, Albedo's best weapon was a 3-star sword. It was silly, but yeah. So my main point was, yeah, essentially, if you're meta defining and you're missing out, that's going to cause players who, man, I got no way to catch this or get this unit. I'm never going to be able to compete with the high PvP people. Great, you're never going to be able to compete with them unless you're spending thousands upon thousands of dollars. But for your goals and reasonable expectations as a free-to-play player, even within that, you wouldn't be able to compete necessarily. You can make people quit the game. Yeah, so that's what I say. They gotta walk that fine line. But that essentially kind of wraps up kind of my thoughts on collaborations, some of our favorite collaborations, and maybe in some current ones that are going on that we're not huge fans of. If there's any collaborations that you guys remember in gachas that you've played in the past and have maybe slipped Steve or my memory, be sure to let us know what your thoughts are on those, or remind us of them, and we can maybe reminisce about the good old days. But what I wanted to jump into, obviously, this past week we had 2.1 go live in Star Rail, and with that, some release of a highly anticipated Acheron. So let's get into that next. So diving into Acheron, most recent new character banner that just dropped in Honkai Star Rail, been highly anticipated by a lot of players, not only just for the way that she looks, and the drip marketing has been phenomenal. The video they recently did with her dancing with Black Swan was that was awesome. And this isn't even because of like waifu stuff. That one was just awesome with the direction they went with that video. But the character themselves, want to break it down. So Acheron is a lightning nihility character, and you may be thinking, Dave, what are we talking about? Lightning nihility? That's Kafka. We have that. And while they do share the same path and they do share the same element, they do not share the same role or the same gimmick, as it were. So whereas Kafka is going to be based around dots and proccing those dots more, dots being damaged over time for the uninitiated, Acheron is going to be, we're wanting more of the debuff side and doing more damage with more debuffs, but specifically her debuff that she's putting on the enemies. But what have been your thoughts? What have been your initial reactions to Acheron, both gameplay wise and character aesthetic?
Character aesthetic wise, it's rough, man. It's real rough. I've been fighting not pulling for her. Let's put it that way. I really want to pull her. I really do. I really want to get Acheron on my team, go out and start playing. The problem that I run into every time is that, unfortunately, she is a DPS carry that I already have plenty of. She does not fill a role that I really feel I need. And I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. Listeners, you'll probably hear this from me a lot, but supports, they have legs, they last for a long time, they have value, they retain value, whereas DPS characters and carry characters are a little bit less valuable in the long run. And we've got a Venturine right around the corner who's a protection, preservation unit that could be useful, especially on follow-up teams. And it just blew my entire savings on, not my real life savings, but my in-game savings on Kafka and Black Swan. I'm in horde mode. I'm trying to build up my war chest again. This way, as other characters come out in the future, I can get them. It's been mentioned previously by I guess the other half of my concern with her. Again, none of this is her look or her style. That's amazing. But some of the concerns I've heard from her kit in regards to the fact that she is an Nihility character and a lot of light cones don't necessarily fit her. That's another point of tension that I have. But what are your thoughts?
And that's a good point. I'll touch on the last thing you said first, and then we'll get into kind of the rest of my thoughts on her. You mentioned not a lot of light cones fit for or from the Nihility path, right? The stereotypical Nihility free-to-play 4-star, so the Silver Wolf, the one we got from the Silver Wolf event, has been predominantly like the go-to for most Nihility characters, and I don't believe that one works on her. That's not the super
Oh,
strong pick that it is on her like it is on everybody else.
yeah. So part of the problem is that Acheron is a standard DPS character in Nihility, which is not a standard DPS class. I believe it was in episode 8 or 9 last season that we talked about the different paths and roles that happen that exist within Honkai Star Rail, and that weird place that Nihility sits where it's like half dot, half debuff. I'm going to drop a spicy hot take. I don't think that Acheron should have been a Nihility character. She works off of debuffs, but we already have characters like that. Dr. Ratio is an example of it. He's a hunt character that, based on the number of debuffs on the enemy, he gets more powerful. I feel like Acheron should have been maybe an Erudition or a. I don't think she fits on Destruction, but she should have been like an Erudition character.
And for
Instead.
more thoughts on our views on the paths and the types of playstyles within those paths, check out episode 8 of season 1, where we talk about paths and roles.
And I apologize for the audio quality on that one. That one's on me.
We got it. We re-uploaded. I think we got it fixed. But if you listened to that the first time and that was the poor quality audio, we do apologize on that. But Steve was able to work some magic and get it fixed and re-uploaded. But yes, yeah. As far as the Nihility light cone options, there aren't very many that are like just default go-to like we've had in the past with other dot Nihility characters. That being said, the signature light cone for her is obviously fits her right because it's her signature. But looking at numbers, looking at guides, and looking at some numbers and some different charts that I've seen, if you don't have her signature light cone and you're just running a free to play 4-star light cone, you're effectively gimping. I think it's almost 30%. Like everything else the same, just changing that light cone, you're looking at a 30% drop in DPS. Now, this doesn't take away from the fact that she is still a very strong character in and of herself. I would put her kind of like right under the Imbiber, Don Hung, Zhang Liu tier in terms of that regard. She, I would say, is maybe a little bit under there if I had to rank them very quickly without going into the details of why I'm ranking them that. But that's where I would put her without her signature light cone. If you have her signature light cone, I think she'd be more on par with those, perhaps. For me, in terms of pulling versus not pulling, yeah, like you mentioned, there's a lot of self-control and discipline coming to not pulling for her because she does look awesome. I'm a sucker for Raiden Shogun in space. I have Raiden Shogun in Genshin, and this is basically her in space. And then there was a character in Honkai Impact the Third that was also a similar character art style as well. That was like, oh, she looks awesome. Got a pull for her too.
I believe that
But
character is just Raiden as well.
oh, it is. Tells you how long I played Honkai Impact Third for and how long ago I played it for. I think is more the case because it was a while ago. That's been around for a bit. Anyway, back to Acheron, right?
Yeah.
So I think because of what I just said and how I'm viewing them in my head, having an E1 Jingliu and having her above a light cone, a signature light cone less Acheron, and where I'm at with my pull economy, because we just pulled for Black Swan and we just pulled for Sparkle, my economy isn't really there. I would be on my 50-50. I think I'm like 8 pulls into pity. So I would have to go 60 plus pulls to even get a shot at Acheron. Now, yes, I've been extremely fortunate and lucky in a lot of my pulls, but you can't bank on that luck. So if I lose my 50-50, then I'm going to be SOL because I don't have enough to get her, much less then also go to the weapon banner and get her signature light cone. So for me, unfortunately, it's a no pull for the time being, right? Because I don't have the econ. She'll probably be a character that I'll have to plan for on a rerun, perhaps, to pick her up just for collection purposes, and then see where that is in the point of the game, if there are other light cone options available to her, or if I still need to consider her signature light cone. But again, at the end of the day, if you're thinking about pulling for her, don't let anybody else's opinion. If you love the character and you want to pull for them, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is playing characters you like and their play styles that you like. Which, speaking of their play styles, her skills and her cutscenes for her skill animation look fantastic. Just the way they emphasize everything going black and white, and then you have the flashes of red and the emphasis on the red. Really cool. And that's also part of the reason I think I loved that last video with her and Black Swan dancing as well, which is their use of the colors in that regards.
Agreed. And again, to the point, we've got a full schedule in this part 2, 2.2 and 2. We're on 2.1, and we've got 2.2 coming up. And they've already done the drip marketing for Boot Hill and Robin, who are coming up.
Yes. Yeah, so we'll have Aventurine in the next banner. And then, yeah, it'll be Boot Hill and Robin, which I don't think we know anything about them, or do we even know what path they're going to be? I don't even think
we know that Boot Hill is a physical hunt character, and Robin is I believe, physical. Don't hold me to that one, but I believe she's a physical harmony. She's a buffer, whatever that one is. I can never remember I'm always iffy on the paths, but yeah, she's a support character. And I already said at the beginning of the second, or I keep on calling it second, but it doesn't matter. I already said at the beginning of Piconi that I'm interested in Robin. I think that she's one of the characters that I might take a swing at, but we will see.
I guess if she's going to become a playable character, I guess that means that she's not dead.
Who knows? Ting Yun is apparently gone, and she's a playable character.
That's true. We have that
meta.
That's true. We have that mystery. We haven't answered that, but she was alive. I guess she was alive when she was pullable, right? Whereas Robin will have been dead and pullable. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see where the story goes.
We'll see.
We'll see if those questions are answered in our playthrough this week of 2.1 Story Quest, because yeah, with that being said, 2.1 having dropped, we haven't had a chance to really fully dive into that. And I know myself and Steve, probably I'm safe to say this, we both like to enjoy the story of the game. So we're not trying to rush through it to be the first ones to get you the story and our takes on it. But we do want to enjoy the game and then ultimately have that discussion with you. So I think that's something we're going to be saving for next week. But in terms of what has come out in 2.1 and some different things going on, we do have some new events, and obviously there's the login bonuses now where we're getting our premium, our limited poll tickets to save up for whomever, and then there is essentially the board game.
Just real quick to clarify, it's the 1 year anniversary is why all this is going on.
Fair. It's 2 point, but it's the 1 year anniversary. Yeah. Fair point. So yeah, so we'll move into that in a minute, but just to again wrap up on Acheron. She looks great. She's a very strong carry for you out there. And again, if you can afford, if you're debating between going for her E1 or going for her light cone, if that's just the position you're in right now, I would go towards her light cone before I go to E1, just because of not really having a free-to-play nihility option that is really for her. There are some that are that work, but like truly for her would go that route. So that's my thoughts. Steve, any closing thoughts for you on Asheron in your experience?
Yeah, I will. I do have one kind of against the grain piece of advice that I would
Ooh,
maybe give.
we like these
Yeah,
hot
yeah.
takes.
I do think it's important to note that all of us do have a free doctor ratio, that his entire shtick is putting debuffs on things and doing more damage. That, plus the fact that I believe Pela is on her banner, means that have the if you are a newer player and you have the bases covered and you are looking for a solid offensive character, I think she is definitely worth a pull. I think there is a potentially very good team out there that is a doctor ratio, Acheron, Pela, and insert somebody else, some character to survivability character. That's what I was looking for. Some survivability character to keep them up. Ideally, somebody who could put a debuff on the enemy. I don't think that there's one out there currently, but maybe in the future. There's potential value there, but only if you've already got other bases covered. Again, your primary focus should probably be getting a survivability character for both of your teams and then support for both of your teams. You can carry whoever you need to after that. But yeah, she's very good. She definitely has a unique place in the meta.
All right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm interested to see what teams will be viable for her and how she ultimately performs in this first cycle of pure fiction and MOC, just to see what the stats and the numbers show up in terms of her percentage in use. So yeah, so now moving to the events and the 1 year anniversary and such. Steve, why don't you go ahead and lead us in there? What's going on? What are some of the things we can expect to see and partake in?
It is the 1 year anniversary of Honkai Star Rail. That means that we will be getting 20 tickets, limited banner pool tickets, over the course of 10 days, I believe it was. It wasn't 7, it was more than that, I thought, but could be wrong. And we will also be getting 1,600 Star Jade will be mailed to us, I believe don't remember the exact date of it, but it should be here shortly. It was whenever the release date is of the game, and it's been a while. It's been a year since the game, and I can't quite remember the exact day, even though I stayed up late for it. Regardless, so that's the free stuff, which I don't want to downplay the free stuff. 30 free pools is nothing to sneeze at, but the meat and potatoes of the anniversary appears to be it's basically a board game, Mario Party-esque, as it were, where you're given roughly 15 dice a day, as well as 3 dice that you can just choose the value of, and you play through in order to generate, I believe it's called Cosmic Bucks or something like that. Been a while, or it's been 12 hours since I played this morning. So you generate your Monopoly money, and through that process, you will also generate quite a bit of Star Jade, as well as a unique phone background for your main menu. I overall enjoy it. I actually don't have a problem with the mini game esque setup of the anniversary, but at the end of the day, what are your thoughts, David?
Yeah, I've been doing the Monopoly board game type thing, and I can appreciate that there is a leaderboard, and on my friends list, you are like by far and away, I think the one who's accrued the most of the Monopoly money. It's not even close. I think it's like by 600,000. It's not even close. I think you were at 2.9 million or something, and I think I finished today. I was at 2.3,
Okay.
and I'm like, man, Steve is doing something with this game better than me.
If you want the tips and tricks, I can give the tips and tricks.
I would say, yeah, go ahead and give any tips and tricks if you have them, because the only really tips and tricks that I ever really with the noted with these types of games is those dice that you can determine the exact outcome for, because games mostly reward completion of laps and stuff like that. I always try and maximize those and only use them as sixes, but when that sixth spot away on the board is like a high value space to land on, if that makes sense.
It does. What I would say is that the times that I actually use them are for assignments. The way that the board game works is obviously or I shouldn't say obviously, but the way the board game works is each space that you can land on has a different event tile type thing that can occur. You can get just currency. You can play a little mini game within the mini game to get more currency. There are Monopoly style locations that you can own. If you land on those, you pay 6,000 of the currency, but every time you roll a dice, you get 2,000. Always buy them. Always. You generate a lot of more money. Rolling 3 dice, it'll pay for itself. And after that, it's pure profit. Always buy them. And one of the things that you can get are called adventures or assignments. Sorry, they're assignments. And in these, they're denoted by a little, I might be colorblind, but I believe it's a bluish or silverish Paimon head. And when you land on those, you can send out 3 characters to do a task. When they complete the task, they come back, you get a short little blurb about what they did, and you get 200,000 of the currency. If you are going to use your remote dice, use them to make sure you hit those. You do not want to miss any of those assignments. So typically what I will do is when I'm within 6 or more away from one of the Paimon heads, I'll use the dice. And then once I'm less than 6 spaces away from one of those assignments, I use my remote dice in order to make sure that I will hit it. Even if that means I'm only using it for a 1 or a 2 or a 3, it's worth it because the payouts on those are so big. Especially because those are also affected by the multiplier that you get. It might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but sometimes when you get the events or mini games, you get the option to get a buff instead of the currency. I would typically go for the buff because what will end up happening is whatever you would get for that currency, the buff will actually end up getting you more overall, because instead of getting, say, 40,000 of the Monopoly money, you can get a buff that will give you 500% of whatever your next thing is. So then that 40,000 that you were going to get, that's just become 200,000, assuming that my math is not awful. Stuff like that. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be too stressed about it. It's going to be designed so that as long as you log in every day, you'll probably beat it with time to spare.
You don't need to
But
min-max,
yeah,
but it's a good helpful tip for those that maybe can't log in every day. But yeah, Hoyoverse, if you log in every day and participate, you're going to finish the event through to completion.
Exactly. But again, it's fun. I enjoy it. I will say that the little assignments are fun because you get to choose which characters you send out to do tasks, and if you want them to do well, you have to learn things about them, or they can reference little pieces of character knowledge. For example, there's one of the assignments where you need somebody to write a script, and the character options that you have are Sparkle, Hanya, and Pella. And that one gave me a chuckle because Sparkle is an actress. Hanya writes, even though she's a robot. She does her writing that you can get through text message and so forth. And then Pella is a Beetle fangirl. That's a bit of fun, but nice little character references.
Yeah, I think I got one that asked who would be good at designing costumes, who would be good at creating the costumes, and then who would you choose to model the costumes, which I thought was pretty funny. And then there was another one that I remember. It was like, I think it was a soccer reference. It was like, who would be the good frontline attacker, who would be a good midfielder, and then who would be the good defender type thing. What? I don't know. But that's, yeah. So as far as the board game event, yeah, again, it's just as long as you're logging in and participating, there's plenty of resources to be had, some stellar jades, poles, and then little cosmetic things, yeah, like the phone casing. Now, something that while we were on our break with Genshin, because they do their little off cycle, right? So they don't overlap new content and give us too much in one time, right? So Genshin, on the Genshin side of events, we had most recently probably the most interactive one being the potion shop or the potion store management game, essentially, which at time of this posting, that event will have ended. But I still wanted to talk about it briefly because Genshin's done similar style events to this, and even Hoyoverse in general. With Star Rail had it with the trade market street and building that up with the crane pathing and connecting different stores. So similar in terms of building up an area. And so I wanted to see, did you participate in this event, Steve? And if you did, what your thoughts were?
I did participate in it. I actually really enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie. I was using it to complete my dailies because I was having fun with it. Was it perfect? No, but I did the silly block puzzle because again, for those of you out there who might not play Genshin or mini games Impact, the mini game for this event was essentially a Tetris style. You have to fill up a board with different blocks and get as much coverage as you can, and each of the pieces have their own aspects to them. They can buff one of, I believe, 5 different stats, and then they had a bunch of sub effects that they had. So there was a lot of puzzle brain thinky aspects to this event that I enjoyed. It wasn't just another combat event. Would I want one of these all the time? Probably not, but as a nice little one-off event, it was good. Also, it had Lisa in it. There's that.
I did like the event overall. Similar to what you said, while it wasn't perfect overall, there was enough there to make it enjoyable. Because like you mentioned, yeah, each potion has 5 attributes that it, depending on what materials you use to fill the grid puzzle, which is where I think the challenge was, because it's easy to take those. Everybody loves the straight line piece in Tetris, or they love the block piece in Tetris, right? Very easy. It fits fair. It's just simple, right? It's when you get those ones that are not perfect squares, or they have they're aligned with a little bit, or they have a jagged edge to it type thing. It's how do we fit those? And I think because different pieces had different attributes, right? You were forced to use some of those pieces that aren't so user friendly in terms of the Tetris game, right? And so that was challenging enough. And they, in typical Genshin fashion, they gave you some life preservers, as it were. So as you leveled up your store, you could have a couple squares overlap, and it wouldn't be detrimental to the puzzle. The one thing I do get tired of in Genshin events, and I wish they would just get rid of this, is simulating time passage as being imperative to the next step of the quest. Wait 2 in-game days for the next event, part of the event. Just stop it. Just cue the next part of the quest and let me do it. But back to the things that I did like about it as well, in terms of the puzzle pieces being different types of potions. It truly was a store manager, because they would give you the marketing news in terms of, hey, this event is going on, and these librarians need potions that will help them focus and relax. So you got to make a potion that's a wisdom potion, but calming and relaxing. And those are going to sell better than if you just throw up strength potions, right? Because not anybody's really wanting the quote unquote strength potion. So I appreciated the supply and demand in that regard. And then we did see a revolving door during each of the cycles of some named characters making appearances, right? We saw Eula make an appearance, Sucrose made an appearance. I think Klee made an appearance. Lisa was the original quest giver, right? So we got to interact with her quite a bit, to Steve's 2 thumbs up for that. So I did like how they brought in a lot of important named characters and gave us a little bit of their personality with each of their interactions with the main character.
Yeah, that basically covered all of my thoughts on it. It was a solid event. Again, at least it wasn't just another combat event. Not that those are awful, but
it was refreshing. It's refreshing to do something else. And as much as maybe some people were tired of mini games within Genshin, Hoyoverse tends to do those mini games pretty well. The previous one, I know I call them gaming, even though that's not how it's pronounced, but funny to me. When on the Cloud Retainer banner, when gaming came out, they had all those little Mario Party mini games, like King of the Hill type stuff. Those are fun and good breaks from just pure combat events. Yeah, enjoyed this one. Would like to see stuff like this come back, and I took it almost all the way to its completion. I think I got all of the Stellar, or it's not Stellar Jade, and it's not Stellar Jade, and again, all the Primo Gem rewards, and then I also wanted to make sure I got all of the Battle Pass points as well, because 1,200 to 1,500 battle pass points that do not count towards your weekly cap. And so I made sure to get those to stay ahead of schedule on finishing the battle pass, so I can, towards the end of the battle pass period, have a few days where if I miss, it's not a big deal, because the last battle pass I literally came down to the last day, so I don't want to do that again. But we do want to thank you guys for joining us this week. Let us know down below, maybe you guys have some favorite collabs in the gacha games that you guys are playing that we've forgotten about, or maybe you have, you know, collabs that you'd like to see your gachas implement. Maybe there's an IP out there that you think would do really well for the gacha game you're playing, or maybe you think would fit in Genshin or Star Rail. So just be sure to let us know down below, and if you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe to the channel. You can email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com if you have any questions or suggestions for the show. We'll also have a link to our Discord in the description, where we have conversation about news both related to Hoyoverse games and just gacha games in general. And then join us next week when we do our full deep dive into the new story content for Star Rail from this patch 2.1.
The only one remains in hands clasped so tight. The only fire exists in brave hearts. Seasons that refuse to change over the years will find their way back on track. We made a choice, go for